Coming up next, the legendary hard rock band whose career was saved by a cheesy ballad written by a soft rocker who became a punchline due to an in-joke in a famous film. After hitting it big in the 70s as one of the most iconic rock bands of the time, they hit a wall and they could not buy a hit. So they made a bold move. They unveiled the mystery that had made them household names in the first place. The problem is it didn't work and sent them in a tailspin. Some say it became a curse for them. Could they break it? Well, finally, after 12 years without a hit, they released a power ballad that scorched the charts, but the song was released under a heavy dispute between a glam rock god and the king of early 90s soft rock. The co-writing credits read that both wrote the power ballad, but what's the real story? Who really wrote it? And did they sell out for one more shot at the title? It's a story of platinum and cheese coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you couldn't get this bad 80s toy jingle out of your head for days after seeing it.
It's Slinky, for fun it's a wonderful toy.
You'll dig this channel of potent musical nostalgia. Man, that one always got stuck in my head. Make sure to subscribe below right now, click the red button. Click the bell so you always know when our new videos and our interviews are dropping. You know, I always love the comeback story. I'm sure a lot of you do as well. Always an entertaining tell of the ups and downs of this business, the music business. Love seeing how bands, remake themselves and live to fight another day, especially after going big and then having to, adjust when a new musical movement changes the industry. And that band has to wrestle with those changes to remain relevant, as well as, balancing that with their artistic integrity. It's a tough balance in an even tougher business. Well, as we've discussed before, the first time the fire-breathing band KISS were in desperate need of a hit single, the band acquiesced to record label pressure and they released Beth. A ballad written by original drummer Peter Criss. It was a dangerous artistic departure for sure. That could have been a destroyer, as the name of the album implied. But necessity is the mother of invention, as the proverb goes. And sometimes, as in this case, necessity is the driving force for a hit. What can I do? Go on, Beth. I thought it was a stroke of genius. It became the highest charting single for KISS. It rose to number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 back in 1976. Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, the leaders of KISS, would find themselves in the same predicament 15 years later as the big hair hard rock 80s were winding down and, moving into the strangeness of 1990. I mentioned this before, but 1990 and part of 1991, it was a weird time in the music industry. Before Nirvana changed everything in later 91. Music was in a really strange place. It was kind of still the 80s, even though the calendar had moved into the 90s. But it wasn't the good 80s. It was the overexposed pop 80s that was invading everyone's radio, and it was hard to know what to make of it.
Who'd have thought
we could be lovers, step by step, ooh baby.
Now, KISS had not benefited from a single in the top 40 since I Was Made for Lovin' You in 1979. And they were once again frantic for a hit. Fortunately, as in 76, they happened to have a ballad in the wings. A power ballad, actually, that Paul Stanley co-wrote with, wait for it, Michael Bolton.
I'll be honest with you, I love his music. I do. I'm a Michael Bolton fan.
Of all people, it was titled Forever. Well, could a ballad come to the rescue once again and give them their first hit in 12 years? Now, since the release of Beth in 76, a lot had changed for the band that taught us how to rock. Peter Criss, for example, who wrote and sang the lead vocal on the track, was fired, and lead guitarist Ace Frehley had also been sacked. Perhaps the biggest change for KISS over that 15-year period was Paul and Gene's decision to take off their iconic makeup and ditch their onstage costumes and theatrics. After an impressive audition where he obliterated the competition, Eric Carr was hired to replace Peter Criss as the drummer for Kiss. That rhymed. After Ace was booted, Paul and Gene hired Bruce Kulick, their lead axeman. Eric Carr, whose costume character in Kiss was the Fox, was an unlikely rock star who had an interesting journey that led him to becoming a core member of the Kiss Quintet. I used the past tense when referring to Eric because sadly he passed away back in 1991, just 41 years of age. Eric's birth name was Paul Charles Caravello. As a teenager who attended the High School of Art and Design in New York City, he was really creative. Actually, throughout most of his youth, Eric's plan was to be a cartoonist. And then he changed his mind and began studying photography. Like many who grew up in the 1960s, Eric worshipped the Fab Four, the Beatles. His great admiration for Ringo Starr actually inspired him to be a drummer. Eric was one hell of a drummer. He was the purveyor of the snare drum sound of 80s rock for sure. He pounded the drums with savage fury as if he were fighting off a gang of attackers. Even on a sensitive ballad like, today's song, Forever, a song about the expression of eternal love, you can feel a stormy intensity of pent-up emotion on Eric's drum parts, for sure. His spirited playing was an important reason why Forever is a stirring declaration of honesty, instead of a drippy love song. There was an interesting parallel between Peter Criss and Eric Carr, besides their shared instrument. Peter Criss rarely sang lead vocals on a Kiss song, as you know, and neither did Eric Carr. But Eric's first lead vocal in the studio was a re-recording of Peter's Beth that was included in the 1988 Kiss compilation Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits. You remember that one? Peter's original recording of Beth was captured in the record plant, same studio where Eric recorded his remake using the exact backing track, actually, that Peter Criss sang to. Paul Stanley called Eric a very talented but troubled soul. He was the member of Kiss that pushed the band into a heavier rock direction after the egress of Peter Criss. In Paul's memoir, Face the Music, A Life Exposed, Paul shared that there were long periods of time when Eric Carr would not speak to him, and he told of several strange things that happened to Eric during his 9-year stint with Kiss. Paul Stanley recalled when Eric was dating a female photographer who actually later took naked photos of the musician in a bathtub holding a glass of champagne. Actually, Eric believed the photographer would never publish the photos, but he was betrayed when the pictures were released in the magazine that the photographer worked for. In early 91, Eric Carr was constantly sick. But, he couldn't peg the culprit of his illness. He was always exhausted and out of breath. So after numerous medical tests, it was discovered that Eric had a form of heart cancer. He underwent surgery after surgery after surgery, but the specialists couldn't stop the cancer from spreading throughout his body. During his bout with cancer, Eric desperately pleaded with Paul and Gene to let him stay in the band. But, the guys were leery. They knew that Eric needed to focus completely on his treatment and try to get well. And the worst thing he could do was return to the crazy, crazy nights of rock and roll. But after receiving the sad news that Eric only had 2 to 3 months to live, Paul and Gene reconsidered and they allowed Eric to return to Kiss. They wanted him to be happy doing what he loved the most, for the last few weeks of his life. When he got the green light to come back to Kiss, Eric flew from New York to LA to film the video for their cover of Argent's God Gave Rock and Roll to You. Takes me back. For the video shoot, though, Eric wore a wig because he had lost his hair from the chemo treatments. God gave rock and roll to you. He was in terrible pain during the entire shoot, and he had periodic shots throughout the filming of it. His condition declined to the point that he couldn't play the drums for the recording sessions for Revenge, the follow-up to Hot in the Shade, and he was replaced by Eric Singer. Eric Carr's final appearance with Kiss was at the MTV Music Awards. This happened in September of 91. And then shortly after the ceremony, Eric suffered an aneurysm and he was rushed to the hospital for emergency care. Several days after that, Eric had another setback when he had a brain hemorrhage and he never regained consciousness. Eric passed away on November 24th of 1991. It's actually the same day that Freddie Mercury died.
Kiss drummer Eric Carr died of cancer at a New York City hospital on Sunday at the age of 41.
In 1999, Eric's family and his Kiss bandmate Bruce Kulick put out Rockology. It was Eric's lone solo record. The album includes demos that Eric and Bruce recorded with the help of their pal Adam Mitchell. There's a song on Rockology titled Tierra that he wrote for a children's TV cartoon named Rockheads, a rock parody with several central characters with unique personalities. I thought it was a really cool way to acknowledge Eric's talent as a cartoonist, in addition to his remarkable musicianship. So the official credits list Paul Stanley and Michael Bolton as the co-authors of Forever. I was waiting to get to this. On the surface, that seemed like an odd fit. We have to remember that before he became the king of soft rock pop in the early 90s, Michael Bolton was a rocker. He had an incredible vocal ability that translated well on the rock tracks. Still, the validation for a co-writing credit on Forever, it's been fiercely contested by Paul Stanley. Outside of a brief writing session while sitting at a corner table inside the restaurant at LA's Sunset Marquis, dubbed the Rock and Roll Hotel, the Kiss co-founder asserts that Michael Bolton had very little to do with writing the lyrics of Forever. Paul claims that he had most of the song finished by the time he met with Michael at the Sunset Marquis. Paul conclusively pointed to the fact that Michael Bolton called the Kiss business office and asked a band management associate to fax him a copy of the lyric sheet to Forever because he didn't have the lyrics and wanted to start singing the song as part of his live performance set. When Bolton sang the song in concert, he would set it up as, here's a song I wrote for Kiss. Bolton loved being associated in any way with a Kiss song, and he mentioned it whenever he had the opportunity. Actually, in an interview with the Washington Post after Forever was swiftly moving up the singles charts, Bolton stated that, how cool it was that he had a single recorded by Barbra Streisand. It's referring to We're Not Making Love Anymore, that he co-wrote with Diane Warren, and Kiss in the same year. During this interview, Bolton reminded the readers that he had written songs for other artists over the last 11 years. In 1983, Michael changed his name from his surname Bolton to Bolton.
I celebrate the guy's entire catalog. Anyway, let's get down to business, Michael.
That same year, Kiss shocked the world when they appeared on MTV on September 18th for an interview wearing no makeup.
Exclusively here on MTV this evening, we're going to see Kiss without their makeup for the very first time.
The interview, hosted by the late J.J. Jackson, the VJ, was a prelude to the world premiere of Kiss's brand spanking new video for Lick It Up. It was Paul who convinced his partner Gene to make the radical change during the recording of the Lick It Up album. Paul wanted to prove something to the fans. He wanted to show that Kiss was a real band that didn't need to rely on gimmicks. In his book, Kiss and Makeup, Gene stated that he reluctantly agreed to take the makeup off. He was actually nervous about how their fans would react, but he understood where, Paul Stanley was coming from. During a photo shoot for Lick It Up, the four band members, Stanley, Simmons, Vincent, and Carr, they defiantly looked into the camera, unmasked for the very first time. Gene made one small concession to the fans in the photo. This is when he stuck out his famous tongue connecting the band's past, with the present at that time. His tongue was a precious asset for Gene, especially while I was in costume as the demon on stage. Actually, at the height of Kiss's popularity in the 70s, Gene purchased a $1 million insurance policy in case something happened to his serpent-like tongue. Even though the Kiss loyalists hated the paintless look, the move actually paid off. Lick It Up sold well over 1 million copies, and the video was one of the most played on MTV at the time. Kiss remained unmasked for the rest of the 80s, into the early 90s actually, except for homage to the 70s with Paul and Gene putting on makeup in a dressing room that was added to the end of the music video. Four Eyes to it, actually.
I'm telling you, no matter what changes, it's still gonna be Kiss.
Yeah, I guess so.
So Kiss didn't officially reapply the paint and bring back their costumes on stage until 1996, when the original lineup of Simmons, Stanley, Chris, and Frehley reunited for a very lucrative worldwide tour that grossed over $150 million. Of course, the Kiss Army went bonkers for this reunion and the return to the classic Psycho circus of Kiss. And from that point forward, Kiss has remained the Kiss that everybody wants to see. Forever, it features an acoustic guitar intro performed by Paul. Studio musician Phil Ashley played keyboards on the track, and as mentioned, Eric Carr played the drums. Although he appeared in the music video of Forever playing the bass and singing in the chorus, Gene Simmons did not actually play any instruments, nor did he sing on this recording, the master. The bass parts were actually played by Bruce Kulick, who had triple duty on Forever. He actually played bass, lead guitar, and teamed up with Eric to provide background vocals to support Paul's amazing lead. I love his vocal on this. Kulick's gentle yet potent acoustic solo on Forever is regarded as one of the best guitar solos on a Kiss song that is not played by Ace Frehley. Soon after leaving Kiss in '96, Bruce Kulick formed the band Union with John Corabi, Brent Fitz, and Jamie Hunting. Bruce joined Grand Funk Railroad as their lead guitarist in 2000 and has been with that group for more than 23 consecutive years. When Paul played Forever to the record label for the first time, it was reviewed by a relative newcomer to the Mercury Records A&R department. The A&R executive requested that Paul Stanley re-edit the ending so that the song had a fade out of the chorus. Pretty much how, all the power ballads were formatted back then. The A&R man's critique didn't go over very well at all with Paul. He felt it was a typical generic construction that he called Song Ranging 101. Paul wanted Forever, to stand out from other power ballads at the time, and he believed that the traditional fade out was not right for the song. In fact, Paul was adamant that the ending that he had arranged gave Forever a unique quality that separated it from the pack. The A&R executive, he just kept pushing his opinion relentlessly, and the more he pushed, the more angry Paul Stanley became. After all, this was the first time in a decade that an A&R rep from the band's record label had given their opinion on a Kiss song. Paul finally had enough, and he shot back, "Man, I was doing this when you were in grade school." Paul told him, "I was at this label well before you got here, and I'll still be here long after you've gone." Needless to say, that was the end of the meeting, and the ending of Forever stayed exactly intact, just as Paul had imagined it. Meanwhile, the A&R executive on the receiving end of Paul's wrath was relieved of his duties. Now, this was shortly after the meeting, just like Paul predicted.
I gotta tell you what I'm feeling inside.
Forever was the last big hit for Kiss. It climbed to number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, one notch away from matching the height of Beth, their biggest hit. In part because of the mega success of Beth, 15 years before, there was no hesitation from Paul or Gene to release a ballad as the second single from Hot in the Shade. This time around, Paul had written and arranged the ballad, and he performed the lead vocal. After writing well over 100 songs, Paul, he knew that Forever was a surefire hit, and of course, he was exactly right. Yeah, I remember when this album came out, I actually got it through Columbia House, the 10 CDs for a penny. I remember when I got that box that had those 10 CDs, I was over the moon. This was back before music was in the cloud. You had the physical product. It was just so much fun opening up the CDs and listening to the entire album, reading through the booklet. It was just glorious. I always liked the Kiss ballads, especially Beth and Forever. It was cool to hear Kiss's take on the power ballad. I thought it was one of the best of this 80s fad. Although it was weird, then and now to see Michael Bolton's name as the co-writer next to Paul Stanley. But what do you think? Did you like Forever? Did you like Kiss in the 80s? What were your favorite tracks by them after they took off their makeup? Let's have a great discussion below. Leave us a comment. If you dig our content, make sure to subscribe below so you never miss out on our videos. What else would you like to see? What other Kiss songs should we cover? Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.